Yo, what's up, peeps, and you wonderful people out there on the internet? The second season of the wonderfulness that is Rings of Power is finally done. I gave my 2 cents, so I thought I'd check out some people's opinions of it. I haven't done a reaction in a while, so let's check it out. All right, so here's the Critical Drinkers post-mortem on the season 2 of Rings of Power.
It's done.
And so, another shambolic, bloated, incoherent mess of a Rings of Power season finally staggers over the finish line like a 300-pound marathon runner in a novelty diver's outfit. And all that's left now is to grab a stick and poke its twitching, oversized carcass out of sheer morbid curiosity for whatever flatulent excretions we can provoke.
Now that's the intro. All right.
This show is a failure in ways that I didn't even think were possible. All of the problems and annoyances of season 1 haven't just continued, they've grown exponentially like a cancer allowed to spread unchecked. The massive and mostly unnecessary cast of characters, the hammy acting, the complete lack of world building, the tonal whiplash, the nonsensical and conflicting character motivations, the jokes that aren't funny, and the supposedly serious moments that are unintentionally hilarious. It's all
The fact that in the final episode of the season, they had numerous threads to wrap up, and so instead of just maybe pushing some of them to the next season, they decided to do each one in like 5 minutes. It was stuff just happened, and it was resolved in their minds. Yeah, it was really bad.
all here, and it's all worse than ever. It's a show that somehow manages to be rushed and superficial, boiling complex events spanning hundreds of years down into a handful of greasy, congealed scenes, but also bone-achingly slow and ponderous, taking forever to get most of its plot lines moving, keeping characters stuck in frustrating holding patterns, and repeating the same ideas over and over again. And since this feels more like an autopsy video than a review, I figured it's as good a time as any for me to go over some of the biggest problems plaguing this show, because who knows, maybe, just maybe, someone from Amazon might see it one day.
Yeah, I seriously doubt that.
And promptly ignore it. Problem the first. Too many characters. This, by far, is the show's biggest fundamental problem because it spawns so many other problems that ripple through the rest of the narrative. See, not only is balancing a large cast of characters spread over multiple locations in such a way that the audience never loses sight of where everyone.
Well, they have so many characters because you got to get that diversity in. So you got to make sure that you have representation of every possible combination of person. So that, that's why you have so many characters. If they're all white dudes, then you don't really need that many characters, I guess.
Everyone is and what they're doing, difficult enough even for skilled writers with strong source material to draw from, of which Rings of Power has neither. But the problem's compounded in this case because the writers have brought in a whole bunch of extra characters that either didn't exist in Tolkien's story, or are doing things and going to places where they were never supposed to be. Like Dangalf and those stupid fucking hobbits who spend literally the entire season walking around and doing absolutely nothing of substance. The actual character of Gandalf shouldn't even be in Middle-earth for like 1,000 years yet, and the writers know this, so they know they can't have him interact directly with the main storyline, which leaves him stuck in a random corner of the world map, spending an entire season looking for his staff and trying to decide on a name for himself.
Gandalf!
It's pointless, boring, time-wasting stuff that absolutely kills the already terrible pacing, and it's done purely because the writers wanted another iconic character that people would recognise. Along with Dangalf comes the two hobbits, which again have no meaningful place in the story, and exist purely because the writers remember Sam and Frodo from the movies. The thing is, Sam and Frodo had an actual quest to follow. Their mission was of vital importance to the story. They weren't just wandering aimlessly across Middle-earth because they had nothing better to do. These characters should absolutely never have been in this show. Their presence is compounded by terrible performances from two actresses who can't seem to believe that they're even there, and every single time they show up, I have to grit my teeth like Tatiana and pray it'll be over soon.
Imagine if you're a new writer and you get an opportunity to add to the lore of Lord of the Rings. You get to create a character. You get to fit someone in, you know, because these worlds are vast. So you can just have more bit players and all that kind of thing. So instead of doing that and just putting your full effort into doing that, you decide to make carbon copies of things that people have are already familiar with, knowing that the fans of that will hate the fact that you did that, and you won't really grow any new things because the normies won't actually care because you didn't flush out your characters. So they just blew an opportunity to actually expand the lore a bit.
Which it usually is in Tatiana's case. Likewise, the writers know that Isildur is going to be important to the story eventually, so they have to account for his existence, but they also have absolutely no idea what to do with him at this stage, so just like Dangalf, he's been put into a time-wasting holding pattern. His entire arc this season could be boiled down to escape a spider, find a horse, find a kid, find a woman, get cock-blocked, and then go home in the huff. Yeah, fucking thrilling stuff right there. Then there's Arondir, another pointless creation of the showrunners whose only vague reason for being in the story pretty much vanished when the actress playing her fucked off to save the world or something. I mean, he always felt like he was put in this show to make a point rather than having a strong character arc in mind.
The point was diversity.
But now he's just kind of there, hanging around where he isn't needed, and showing up wherever the writers want some cheesy Matrix-style fight scenes. Honestly, every single time I see his blank, gormless face show up in another place he's got no good reason to be, it's like hearing that Pedro Pascal's been cast in yet another role he isn't suited to, ruthlessly pursuing his quest to be in every single show, movie, and video game in existence. This right here is the very reason why you don't fuck with the source material, especially when the source material was written by one of the greatest authors of the 20th century.
And given the fact that even though he was stabbed and shot with an arrow in episode 7, he somehow managed to survive unharmed in episode 8. Therefore, he is going to be in season 3.
Problem the second, the worlds. Much like the first season, the actual dimensions and layout of Middle-earth are still a complete fucking mystery, because characters and even entire armies can apparently fast travel from one location to another hundreds of miles away in the space of a single episode.
Which is the problem in very many modern television shows, especially the fantasy ones, is that they don't give you a sense of scale, because again, stuff just happens.
The result is that even for someone like me with a half-decent grasp of the geography of actual Middle-earth, the timeline of events here is completely nonsensical and confusing. At one point, an orc army numbering in the tens of thousands, complete with supplies, siege engines, and all the associated equipment they'd need, is somehow able to travel from Mordor to Eregion, a journey of almost 1,000 miles with an entire mountain range in between, in the space of like 2 episodes, without being spotted or tracked by anyone.
Well, they are consistent because that same army managed to be snuck up on by not one, but 2 different armies. The elves on horses and the dwarves who traveled over from where they live at in battle armor and carrying whatever they need, snuck up on the orcs. So, yeah, they did that with 3 different armies.
Fuck. And the show makes absolutely no effort to account for any of this. A fantasy story lives or dies by the believability of its world, and despite having perhaps the most richly described fictional world in all of literature, Rings of Power still manages to fuck it up because it refuses to adhere to its own rules. And if it doesn't care about crafting a believable story, then why should the audience? Problem the third, everyone is a complete idiot. Characters in Rings of Power range from childishly gullible and foolish to making insane leaps of logical deduction that exist purely to move the plot forwards. The elves, supposedly the wisest and most intelligent beings in Middle-earth, are easily duped into making the Rings of Power by a guy who conveniently shows up out of nowhere claiming he wants to help, and immediately takes command of the entire city without a single objection.
In order for them to shrink down the amount of time it takes for all this stuff to have happened, everyone has to be dumb. They have to ignore obvious clues and things like that because per the lore, this took place over thousands of years. So therefore, it was subtle. Like Saruman was subtle. So all the influence was just little here, a little there. You can't be subtle and condense stuff down to a small amount of time. So everything has to be blunt. And in order for that to work, everyone else has to be stupid and just basically ignored everything. That is pretty obvious to anybody who looks at the situation.
Nobody thinks that he might have ulterior motives for doing all this? Nobody? Fuck off, show. Battles are conducted in a way that could only come from the minds of soft, comfortable, millennial Californian writers that have never so much as glanced at a book on medieval warfare. Commanders of armies are willing to give up a decisive advantage that could end an existential threat to the entire world purely because their friendy Wendy happens to be in danger. Problem the fourth, Sauron. The show's treatment of Sauron is probably one of the most embarrassing and degrading pieces of character assassination I think I've ever seen in my life. Literally the most terrifying manifestation of evil in Middle-earth, more like a dark god or a force of nature than a living being, has been reduced to a wimpy-looking guy in a cheap wig, crying like a little girl and simping over Galadriel of all people.
Somehow, at the beginning of the season, he gets betrayed by his orc army very easily and does nothing to prevent them from murdering him. And then at the end of the season, that same orc army decides to just join his cause just because reasons. But just because the person who wrote this needed for that to happen. It was actually pretty amazing to watch.
I mean, I get it, it's a modern show for a modern audience, which means it's written by people whose entire literary worldview consists of, wouldn't it be cool if these two characters had feelings for each other? But good god, they broke the dial on the cringe machine when they put this shit together. This is gonna shock you to your core, but believe it or not, some people are motivated by more than just who they want to fuck. It doesn't elevate these two characters by giving them a sappy romance story to tie them together when they never actually interacted with each other in the source material, but it actually diminishes Sauron as an antagonist because his entire arc now is motivated by trying really hard to impress Galadriel. The writers
They had this Lucasfilm has the same problem with Grand Admiral Thrawn, who they're trying to make into the new bad guy for all their new stuff. They can't make him very menacing because that will be a man defeating a woman in terms of Ahsoka. So therefore he has to lose to her. But at the same time, he is supposed to be an existential threat. But you're just supposed to go with it, even though they have given you no indication that he is. Because once again, he keeps losing to these people. And because all of their heroes are women, and a man can't beat a woman, so therefore, there you go. But that seems to be a trope with modern writers.
Trying to humanize a character that absolutely isn't human and isn't motivated by the same drives and needs as a human. And I don't know, man, if I was Sauron, I certainly wouldn't want to put my finger in this girl's ring. Problem the fifth, moral retardation. Just like so much of the shitty, nihilistic, postmodernist sludge manifesting as entertainment today, there's a pervasive and laughably ham-fisted attempt to rewrite the nature of good versus evil in Rings of Power by reframing villains like Sauron, Adar, and even the Orcs as conflicted and morally grey beings with valid reasons for doing what they do. The Orcs aren't violent and destructive beings of pure rage and hatred who exist only to fight and kill. Now they're misunderstood victims who just want to find a home and raise their families in peace. And it's only
the funny thing is like they're not even consistent with that. It's like they'll go from the family orcs to them just being murdered by the hero because that's what needs to happen. And yeah, this show's a wreck.
Those nasty men and elves who keep persecuting them, you see. It's so laughable and ridiculous that I have to keep reminding myself that yes, this is real. This was actually put into a mainstream show by writers who probably thought they were making some deep philosophical point about good versus evil. That would make for interesting stuff in an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation, but it absolutely does not work in a fantasy setting like this, especially one where the nature of the orcs has already been very well established by the author. And it all flows from the same lack of creativity and imagination that sees parallels for modern society and people in absolutely everything, where none was ever supposed to exist. The orcs are not supposed to be a metaphor for some racial or cultural group in the modern world, so they don't have to be given the let's see things from their point of view treatment. If good and evil don't really exist in this show, then why the fuck should I root for the supposed good guys when they're no better than the villains? All of these various problems collectively add up to a show that just refuses to to learn from its mistakes, that's so set on its course that even losing half its audience isn't enough to change direction, and that's likely to go down as the most expensive flop in entertainment history. And what's particularly interesting is the reaction to it now, or lack thereof. The first season of Rings of Power stirred up a firestorm of controversy and backlash from Tolkien fans who were rightly disgusted by such a bastardization of their worlds. But there's been this kind of quiet resignation that's settled on this season, like people have already made the rational decision that the show is simply irredeemable and just walked away from it. And honestly, if I wasn't here specifically to review it, I probably would have joined them. Who knows how many of them will even stick around for season 3? I certainly don't. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Go away now.
Alright. No, that was pretty, yeah. Pretty much my thoughts as well. He articulated a little bit better than I do. But I didn't watch season 1. I was talked into watching season 2. And don't think that I'm actually going to watch season 3. So, because it's 2 years from now, I have no idea where I'm going to be at then. But who knows? This show was a very terribly written show. I'm quite sure after all of this, there are going to be all kind of articles and whatnot about how everyone's sexist and racist and blah, 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 blah. Just like The Acolyte, it's just a bad show. Simple as that. All right, so thanks for enjoying the Critical Drinker with me. So I would like to say later.